Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and in this video I'm going to explain what a plummy British accent is. People often say, "Oh, you sound like you've got a plum in your mouth." I know it's a figure of speech, but is there anything behind it, anything more literal? Do people really seem as though they've got a fruit in their mouth and they don't open their mouth properly? I don't think so, or that it's a fruity accent. One sometimes hears that, but fruity might imply camp as well. Certainly in the 20s and 30s, fruity was another word for gay, a code word for gay. We didn't actually use the word gay like that. Not that most people with this accent are homosexual. Wouldn't be good or bad if they were. But perhaps it was people with other accents suggesting, well, if you sound like that, you're effete, maybe even effeminate, over-sophisticated, all the rest of it, false. So this accent is more commonly found in southeastern England. However, there are people throughout the British Isles who speak like this. Admittedly fewer, the further one goes from London, and even in London it's a minority accent. So it's known as other things, as a public school accent, as a upper class accent with C pronunciation, and so on. So I'll go through some of the common phrases and a few of the distinctive pronunciations that one finds in this accent. And as I always emphasise, despite having this accent, I'm of lower class origin. Saying "how are you" is a perfectly acceptable way to ask as to somebody's well-being, or indeed "how do you do?" "How do you do" is a bit more distinctly upper class and old-fashioned, but still it's en vogue saying it that way. The ways people don't say it are, I suppose, like in Dublin saying "how are ya?", putting the emphasis on a different syllable on the last one and ramming it all together, or like in Belfast, "how's about ya?" I'm not sure what else people would say. Oh yeah, so saying "drawing room", that's distinctly plummy and not too old-fashioned, acceptable still. One might say "living room", that's more of a middle-class way to say it. There are certain words that people certainly wouldn't use, like saying "lounge", that would be frowned upon. So it's the room where people sit and relax and possibly watch television in their house, where guests are entertained. That's what it's called. Cigarettes, well, people would use the slang word ciggy occasionally, or indeed fag. I wonder if fag is falling out of usage. Fag does not mean a homosexualist. One of my friends, he went to Virginia. Where is it? Where that Naval Academy is, Annapolis. And he was in a bar with some naval officer candidates and his father, who was a professor, and he said, "Right, I've got to go down to the harbour, try and find some fags." And everyone was stunned, thought that he was picking up men, but no, he meant he was trying to buy cigarettes. And it's a common misapprehension amongst American military personnel when Britishers use fags to mean tobacco to be smoked. Which reminds me of another old-fashioned word. I cannot be fagged. I mean, I can't be bothered. I think it's an abbreviation of fatigue. In public schools in the United Kingdom long ago, some of the younger boys had to be fags, as in act as servants for the older ones, unpaid. So I think it relates to that. Well, so here we come to some class prejudice. There's an appropriate term for a working class person, chav, but it would also suggest this person's uncouth, loutish, boorish, and all the rest of it. But of course there are slurs for upper class people, or those who sound like me, saying they're toffs or they're toffee-nosed. I can't think what else. People would say they're posh, but posh isn't necessarily an insult. Who's the best at imitating this accent who doesn't speak like it anyway? And I would think that'd be John Lithgow, the American actor. You may have seen him in Cliffhanger, came out 22 years ago. And he's speaking in received pronunciation. And what's superb about his rendering of it is that he doesn't overdo it. It's very easily to fall into the mistake of exaggerating the accent, but no, he gets it spot on. That might be another thing to say in a plummy accent, meaning just right. Then you may have seen him in The Crown, where he's playing Sir Winston Churchill. And Lithgow does a superb version of the plummy accent. Of course, he's doing a 1950s edition of that accent, which is more distinctive. The vowels are longer, the pronunciations are more different from standard British English or standard American or really any other version of the English language. And he was right to do it because that's how Churchill actually spoke, and particularly at that time. My only problem with Lithgow's portrayal of Churchill is Lithgow is 6 inches too tall. Churchill had a bit of a stoop when he was in his 70s, and Lithgow had to overdo the stoop also because of his height. Another thing we say riding. We don't say horseback riding, because what else would you be riding unless you're in a country with lots of camels or something? And yes, one certainly rides on its back. Where else on the beast would one ride? There you go, saying one to mean people generally. Because if I said you, you might think I'm talking about to you individually, or you, a distinct group. People do swear in this accent, though I shan't give you some examples. All the swear words are heard in this accent. It's usually non-rhotic, which is to say that we don't pronounce the letter R unless it's a word initial. There are exceptions, that's why I said usually. For instance, if there is a double R in the word, like barrister in the middle, and on the end the R isn't really pronounced, it's a trace if at all. There was another example, when I said for instance, the O in for in this case is elided. It sounds more like it's one word, for instance. Perhaps I'm overdoing it than when I'm doing it more consciously. So H's are pronounced usually in hello, house, Henry. Might say but of course. Obviously they're not pronounced in silent words like honour and our, where the H is silent. You might think, why am I bothering to point this out? Isn't it bleeding obvious? There's a bit of a mildly taboo word I'm putting in from Cockney, as in the working class London accent, saying bloody as an emphasizer or an intensifier like very. I point out that H's are usually pronounced because in the working class London accent they drop their H's. So saying hello, house, Henry, hospital, things like that. Now WH words, here the H is pronounced, but again, one mustn't over-egg it, saying who, whom, which, why, whose, when, whenever, whichever, whomsoever, whoever, wherever, what, whenever, things like that. Because I know we write it WH, but of course it's pronounced HW. Now I could emphasize it too much, who, where, and things like that. It also helps to distinguish between were and where. There are certain pronunciations which have gone. For instance, oh hello was hello 50 years ago or more, but gone in the old days was gorn, to rhyme with corn. Sounded as though it was spelled G-O-R-N. There's a famous song by Flanders and Swan about the French horn, and they rhyme gone with corn. These would be affectations these days. Perhaps there are some very elderly people who speak that way. And there again, in the word perhaps, people sometimes elide the E and pronounce it praps. So occasionally we knock a syllable out of a word. Things like jolly good show, that's anachronistic. Some people may go in for archaism such as by Joe, but I think that's deliberate, unless it's a very old person who's speaking. So that's it. Here are some examples of how to speak in this posh or plummy British accent. You might want to imitate it if you're an actor or something like that, or simply be curious about language generally. I find linguistics fascinating, particularly social linguistics. So there aren't right or wrong accents. They're prestige accents like this one, but it also generates some hostility. And people shouldn't be snooty. They're often thought to be snooty. They speak this way and look down their nose against other people who are not so fortunate, because this accent is associated with high socioeconomic status and often tertiary education. So some of these words I've used are social markers. People say them to clarify their social status. Likewise, working class people might wish to be crystal clear about their social status by using some social markers and counter signal to emphasize social solidarity, say that I'm from this place, because the lower status accents tend to be very localized. One can trace it to a city or a county and so forth, and that builds a sense of unity with other speakers of that variety of English.